Okay, so today's webinar is called The 5 Misconceptions People Have About Agile Software Development. Brief intro about myself. My name is Todd Kamens. I'm the president and founder of Guidance Technology. I have a degree in operations management from the University of Massachusetts, and at UMass I studied Agile, Lean, and Kanban techniques, but mostly as they applied to the manufacturing industry. At that time, I didn't really learn about how we could take some of these techniques that we were using and apply them into the software world. I have more than 20 years of experience providing world-class project management consulting, including 15 years focused on Agile software development teams. So I have a good combination between my operations background, project management background, and now Agile methods that I've been able to train and coach companies to focus on how can they deliver value to their stakeholders while also eliminating wastes. In 2001, I decided to start my own company called Guidance Technology, and we have helped Fortune 500 as well as smaller companies improve efficiencies in their product development practices. We provide Agile training, coaching, consulting. We also do a little bit of technical staffing, and we've really excelled in every way. We help our clients gain that competitive advantage by staying focused on what's important, building software faster and more cost effectively so we can return a higher return on investment. So enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about where you might be today. So where are you today? You know, maybe you've started working with Agile and things aren't going well, or maybe you're thinking about adopting Agile, but you're worried about what the change might be and what the impact of that change might be. You might be using traditional or waterfall SDLC approaches. You might be doing iterative. That being said, things might feel comfortable, you're just not getting the results that you expected. So adopting Agile isn't always the answer, right? So let's take a closer look. You know, we know that Agile has lots of great benefits. We know that it allows us to have flexible requirements in development. We know that it gives us built-in increments and iterations. Because of that, it allows us to encounter errors and risks sooner. You hear a lot about, failing fast. We increase our organizational and team efficiencies. We decrease unnecessary documentation in meetings. And the core behind this is we provide a value-based approach to software development. So Agile might sound like what it is you've been looking for, but again, it's not easy. Old habits die hard. If you've been trained by the PMI and the PMBOK, you've learned how projects should be controlled, monitored, and executed to perfection. But that might not be good enough for what you're trying to achieve in today's marketplace. So today, right, a traditional project, we have work breakdown structures, project plans, milestones, deliverables. Now we have dashboards and status reporting, issues and risks, budget management, and we're really comfortable with how things are done. We know how to communicate, and we've really become accustomed to a lot of the tools that the PMI has helped us understand. And that's a great, great thing. But for a project that's going to be working on adapting changing requirements, a traditional waterfall approach doesn't always work. So Agile projects, on the other hand, focus on empirical results. We use roadmaps to draw out broad strokes of functionality and when are we going to release things. We rely on things like a product backlog or a sprint backlog. We focus on short sprints or iterations or time boxes. Again, everything's about value. The business is heavily involved. Every event is time boxed. And now we have different ways to manage our work. So it's not to say that the PMI methodology is a bad way of doing it. It's just saying that with Agile, we have new tools and new ways of doing things. So where does that leave us? You know, working on numerous Agile projects, I've seen firsthand how to succeed while meeting the expectations of both the customer and management. And what I'm going to do today is talk about the 5 misconceptions that I hear most often from my clients and students in the hope of quelling the fear that you may have about transitioning to an Agile methodology. So first, let's just take a step back. You know, remember, we're all creatures of habit. So what stands in the way of change often is our fear of change itself. This fear is basic to human nature. We can feel anxious even when the change is positive. I find this a little ironic giving this webinar the day after a presidential election, but you know, whether the change is positive or negative, people by their nature fear change. And moving out of our comfort zone immediately sets off our fight or flight alarms, and it alerts us to danger, and sometimes to the detriment of future learning. So let's look at the first misconception. So the first misconception I'm going to talk about is that this sort of notion that Agile projects don't create documentation. So the Agile Manifesto states that working software is valued over comprehensive documentation. While there is value in comprehensive documentation, working software is valued more. What the manifesto does not say is that Agile projects should ignore documentation. Rather, that documentation should be prioritized based on the value that it provides to the customer. In looking at the documents required today, a team could determine that a technical requirement document, or TRD, has no value to the customer and therefore should no longer be created. And you know, in the spirit of the Agile Manifesto, the team would be right. When the team comes together to create their definition of done for the sprint, the team and the product owner will work together and they'll define what does done mean. The two parties need to ensure that their definition of done satisfies the needs of the customer and the company. Therefore, if the company requires the creation of that technical requirement document, then the team cannot ignore it, and it must include this in their definition of done. And this holds true for any other deliverable required by the company, like audit documents, user documentation, and so on. The customer is the primary focus on Agile projects. However, you cannot ignore the demands of the company. If you find yourself in this situation, you need to examine the documentation being created to be able to then ask why it is needed if it is not providing any value to the customer. And so here is our Agile Manifesto statement. Working software is valued over comprehensive documentation. So let's talk a little bit about misconception number 2. I hear this a lot. An Agile project seems like it's never going to end. You know, we're used to waterfall software development projects. They have a distinct start and end date. At least that's what the project plan tells us. And they have phases on where we're going to complete different types of work. Agile projects work using a roadmap, and the roadmap is based off of broad strokes of functionality that's going to be delivered over multiple releases using a release plan that will then pull requirements from the backlog, which is never actually complete. So when Agile projects provide the flexibility to introduce requirements at any time during the project while keeping the team engaged continuously through a short iteration or sprint. The thought of an incomplete product backlog leads many people to infer that requirements could continuously be added to the list and the product development would go on indefinitely. I like to think of it this way. The Agile methodology manages the product backlog in a similar way to how a manufacturing floor is set up to build a product. On the manufacturing floor, we gather the machinery needed to build our product. We line them up in a fashion that we feel can complete the work, but we're not really sure of the capacity of the machinery when we first turn them on. Once we fire up the machines and run them for a cycle or two, we can see what they're capable of producing. And we can then have an actual metric to determine our future throughput. Using this metric, we can now determine with precision what the factory can produce, and therefore, how long will it take us to complete a large order. It is true, just like the factory floor scenario, that the product could continue on indefinitely by feeding the machines. But that assumes that there are adequate resources and funds to keep the team going. Rather than focus on a never-ending potential list of requirements, the focus should be on the empirical results gathered and the value being delivered to the customer. This will allow you to determine a team's capacity and how much of the product backlog will be delivered under the current project constraints. The third misconception is that Agile projects require too much time from the business. Well, the fourth principle of the Agile Manifesto simply states, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. And who would have thought that this simple statement would cause so much angst? On a Scrum project, the product owner, or voice of the business, plays a key role. They're responsible for defining features of the product. They decide on release dates. They prioritize features according to market value. They have overall responsibility for the total cost of ownership and the profitability of the product, or ROI. The product owner is also the person responsible for accepting or rejecting the team's work. Scrum teams rely on the product owner to play a critical part in order to ensure success. So when teaching product owners about Scrum and their responsibilities, you start to see an excitement in people's eyes as they start to realize the tremendous power that they're going to have over the product development effort. People love the fact that they can reprioritize the backlog to make sure that the important features are developed in a set order and that any other requirement can be completely removed. It's not until the product owner is back at their desk doing their quote-unquote day job do they start to realize the time commitment expected of them by the team. The team will fail without the product owner's direction and focus. The excitement of having the power to control the product features is now weighed against the time commitment required to support the Agile process. Scrum requires that business people and developers work together throughout the project to ensure that the right product is being built. This interaction allows for open communication of ideas and quick resolution of issues in order to avoid unnecessary meetings and the incorrect product being created. There are several approaches that can be followed to ensure that the team receives adequate time from the product owner. One approach is to introduce a chief product owner who then can delegate some of the work, but ultimately they own the responsibility for the overall product that's being created. Delegation can come in many forms. It can be by feature, sub-product lines, business, and even data level. In the end, it is the true business owner who has the authority over the product. And looking at this time commitment as a burden should be strongly discouraged if you are focused on building the right product. You know, interestingly, I just spoke yesterday at Northeastern University to an undergraduate class studying the PMBOK. And in doing some prep before I got there, I was reviewing the PMBOK. I haven't really read it in a while, and I thought it was a little interesting. If you look through all the different items that the PMBOK teaches you, the one thing that stuck out right away in my years now of spending time focused on Agile is stakeholders, and a whole chapter in learning about stakeholders is at the end of the book. I think it's actually the last chapter in the book. And yet here I am telling you, and the Agile community tells us, that stakeholders are the start of the project. Without stakeholders and without people involved, why are we building something to begin with? So I thought that was very interesting and sort of telling of where the movement has gone. We're going to start a project. We're going to build something that has value. The only way we're going to know it has value is to let the business work hand in hand with us and tell us what they want to build. So let's look at the fourth misconception here. And I'm going a little quickly. I'll answer any questions that come up at the end. I blocked the questions out right now so I can focus on this, and I hope you're all following along. The fourth misconception that I hear very often is, Agile projects really lack an effective project management methodology. Well, Agile is defined as an adaptive project management lifecycle, and it moves from iteration to iteration based on very limited information for the final solution. So each iteration learns from the preceding one, and then we redirect and make course corrections as the next iteration comes along and attempt to converge on what becomes our acceptable solution. At the discretion of our product owner, an iteration may release a partial solution. So this type of life cycle has its strengths and weaknesses. On the positive side, we don't spend a lot of time working on non-value adding work. It doesn't require a formal change management practice. It doesn't spend time planning for uncertainty, and it provides the maximum business value within the given time and cost constraints. On the negative side, it requires greater client input. It lacks the ability to clearly identify what will be delivered at the end of the project, and it thrives on having co-located teams. So it's not that Agile lacks an effective project management methodology. It's that Agile has a different way of managing projects. Agile plans are easy to change, limit dependencies, and allow you to plan more as the work unfolds. This concept is called progressive elaboration, and when it's used properly, it is extremely effective. Progressive elaboration allows you to continuously improve your plan as more information becomes available. Each iteration becomes more accurate, and you rely on that information from each release to support and plan your next release. Since Agile projects support adaptive changing requirements, it needs to have a project management framework that can support the fluidness of scope. Leveraging progressive elaboration, Agile projects welcome changing requirements even late in the project and provide a competitive advantage to the company. The Agile product lifecycle describes a set time frame for when each level of planning should take place as follows. We start with a vision. Our vision is telling us where are we going and how will this product fit in with the vision of our company. And the vision should be reviewed annually by our product owner. We move down a step to our roadmap. Our roadmap, as you've seen earlier, is a broad stroke framework of functionality and where we're going. And that should be reviewed semi-annually by the product owner. Now that we know why we're building this system and where we're heading, now we have to start rolling up our sleeves and talking about when. When are we going to actually release the product or incrementally release the product? So the release plan is created, and that should be reviewed quarterly by the product owner and the team. The reason the team is now involved is just because the product owner says they want something doesn't mean that the team actually has the capabilities of delivering it. And even still, until we execute a sprint, we still are not 100% sure, just like our manufacturing floor, if we have the capability or capacity to meet that release date. Once we get through our release plan, we're now down into our action. We are now at the sprint plan. So this should be reviewed each sprint. This is the product owner and the team, and our daily plan. This is our stand-up or our scrum, and this is reviewed daily by the team. So to say that Agile projects lack an effective project management methodology is very, very misleading. Agile has a strong framework in place, but it differs from a waterfall project that people may be used to using today. And finally, misconception number 5 is Agile projects don't provide enough detail on when functionality will be delivered. You know, traditional or waterfall projects start with a project plan, and they lay out the phases of the project over time. You know, we have analysis, design, develop, testing, integration, releasing. And, you know, when the project gets closer to development, it's not uncommon to add additional deliverables to the plan based on key functionality. Since development's going to end, in order to deliver the product to be tested by QA, it's easy to view the project plan and infer when product functionality will be complete. If there's a change request approved, the plan can be changed, or a new deliverable can be added to the plan. Well, Agile projects don't use project plans or these phases, and it makes many people uncomfortable thinking that they won't know when the product will be complete, or even when key functionality will be delivered. The project plan has become such an important tool for communication over the years that removing it in place of something else is a big change to get used to, and people often get nervous. To address this concern, Agile projects use different tools, such as a product roadmap. And we use this roadmap to communicate where the project and product are going over time. I mentioned earlier that the roadmap is a view of the planned future laid out in broad strokes. The roadmap shows planned or proposed product releases, and it lists high-level functionality or maybe a release theme that's laid out in a rough timeline. Usually these themes are extended for a few releases into the future. The roadmap will have lots of wiggle room in that requirements may not fully be completed at the time it was created, and the product backlog prioritization process could change at any time to meet the needs of the business, so the roadmap could change as well. Using a product roadmap, the team is able to convey the type of functionality they should be working on at a point in time. The roadmap doesn't get into the requirement or user story level, as the complete requirement to satisfy each high-level theme may span multiple releases and could change over time. As the team begins their work, the scope of each release comes into focus. Agile projects leverage this roadmap to define a release plan. The release plan goes into that next level of detail and sets a common understanding. But again, remember, this is a projection and not a commitment. When dealing with adapting, changing requirements, everyone needs to understand that this ability could impact your release, and based on decisions made during the project, things could change. The product owner needs to determine just how they will release the product to the users. Will they organize their release around business value, grouping of features, or even an internal release or an external release? In the end, it's up to the product owner to determine how, when there's enough functionality created, will they deliver value to the customer. If we look at these 5 misconceptions as risks, I hope by now you understand better how Agile can mitigate each of these. So the first risk we talk about is, the risk that an Agile project will produce no documentation. Well, we mitigate that risk during our definition of done. it is up to the team to determine what level of documentation is appropriate for the project and the company. The risk that the project seems like it will never end is mitigated by leveraging empirical results to determine a predictable velocity against a product backlog and determining when enough functionality will be created to release value to your users. The risk that Agile requires too much time from the business is mitigated by the business creating the requirements to ensure the right product is created, and if needed, by using the chief product owner concept with delegates to meet the time required. The risk that Agile lacks an effective project management methodology, it's mitigated by leveraging a lightweight, flexible methodology with key checkpoints along the way. And finally, the risk that there isn't enough detail to know when the project will be delivered is mitigated by using the roadmap and release plans to convey broad strokes of functionality as it may be released over time. So as you can see from these 5 misconceptions, Agile has a solution to address all of them, but it may not be a solution that you've used in the past, and therefore you might not be comfortable with it. Adopting a new methodology that can support changing requirements and quick, small iterations requires new ways of communicating, documenting, and planning. It is very common for people to feel uncomfortable when transitioning from one process to another, so don't feel that you're the only one that has these fears. The larger issue is not the fears themselves, but rather continuing to do what you're doing today and expecting a different result. I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar. It's important to understand that each Agile adoption brings different fears and barriers to the table, and they'll need to be addressed uniquely based on the situation. We work in a business world that relies on people to work together to accomplish goals, and that isn't always so easy. If you want to learn more about how you can help your Agile adoption succeed, please head over to our website. I have a link here, guidancetechnology.com/resources, where you can watch short videos, you can read content related to a variety of Agile issues projects face today. And also, you can reach out to me directly. You can email me at tkamens@guidance-technology.com, and I'd be more than happy to continue the conversation. I also provided my LinkedIn profile URL in addition to my Twitter profile. I am extremely active and on the Twitter community and LinkedIn community, and I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions at all. So we wrapped up a few minutes early. I am more than happy to answer any questions if anyone's out there. Otherwise, you guys can all have a half hour back of your time and have a great lunch today. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to end the presentation today. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I hope that you really gained something valuable from this knowledge today. Take care.